The stage was lit with the usual polish of high-profile British television. Sleek lighting and cold cameras capturing every moment as Piers Morgan welcomed Denzel Washington to his program. Expecting another typical celebrity exchange, but from the beginning, there was something unspoken simmering beneath the surface. Something in the way Denzel sat calm, but unsmiling. Focused yet clearly guarded as though he had walked onto this stage not to entertain but to endure. And as the pleasantries passed and Piers shifted the conversation toward politics, race, and the role of actors in public discourse, the mood began to bend, not break, under the weight of Piers's familiar provocations. As he framed questions with that sly sharpness he was known for, challenging Denzel's views on social justice, questioning the sincerity of Hollywood's commitment to the causes they promote, pressing for contradictions and inconsistencies, as if sniffing out weakness. But Denzel didn't play along. He answered briefly, directly, without flourish, as though he knew Piers's game and had no interest in being a pawn in it. And when Piers, grinning as always, asked a question clearly designed to bait him, "Don't you think someone like you, with your influence, should stop preaching and start listening?" The air thickened with tension, and the crowd went utterly still. Because while the words sounded mild on paper, the tone had shifted, and everyone knew it. And Denzel, rather than rise in volume or fall into defensiveness, simply sat back. In his chair, looked Piers squarely in the eyes, and after a silence long enough to make even the cameraman nervous, said in the calmest, clearest voice, "I listen more in a day than you have in your whole career." And the moment shattered the room not with noise, but with absolute quiet, the kind that made the audience hold their breath, the kind that even Piers, for once, didn't interrupt, because something in the weight of Denzel's words had cut deeper than any retort ever could. Not insult, but reflection. Not volume, but precision. And while Piers smirked nervously and tried to shift topics, the power dynamic had already shifted permanently. As viewers at home and in the audience understood, they had just witnessed something that couldn't be undone or diluted by edits or commentary. It was a moment of pure truth, delivered not as attack, but as revelation. And in the days that followed, the internet exploded with clips of that single line, dissected from every angle, turned into memes, quoted by commentators, and celebrated across platforms from Twitter to TikTok, with hashtags like hashtag Denzel silences, Piers, and hashtag #OneComSentence, dominating trends. And while Piers attempted to reframe the incident on later shows, calling Denzel overly sensitive or unwilling to be challenged, the public had already chosen its verdict. It's not just because of Denzel's words, but because of the grace with which he said them, a lesson in restraint in an age addicted to outrage. And even those who typically aligned with Piers had to admit, privately or publicly, that the moment had landed hard and real. It's a rare TV instance where substance had overpowered spectacle. And as late-night hosts joked and pundits debated, Denzel himself remained silent about the encounter, offering no follow-up statement, no apology, no clarification. Because he didn't need to, his sentence had already done the work, already said the thing that couldn't be unsaid, and those close to him revealed he had known what was coming, had expected the ambush, but had decided beforehand that the best way to handle noise was not with more noise, but with stillness, with clarity. And perhaps that was the real reason the moment echoed so powerfully, because it wasn't about who won or who lost. It was about what happens when someone chooses dignity over theater, strength over spectacle, and leaves the rest of the world stunned, not by shouting, but by the overwhelming power of stillness. The silence Denzel left behind didn't just echo in the studio, it radiated far beyond, infiltrating news cycles, social media algorithms, and the hidden spaces of private conversations in Hollywood. In London, and in every green room where public figures weighed the cost of honesty versus compliance. And as clips of that single sentence were slowed down, looped, remixed, and analyzed, something shifted in the air around Piers Morgan's brand. Not enough to dismantle it, his audience was loyal, conditioned for confrontation, but enough to pierce the surface, to crack the sheen of invincibility he'd built over decades of combative interviews, and he knew it. You could see it not in his words, but in the stiffness behind his eyes during his next few shows. where he brought up Denzel's name unprompted, cloaking himself in defensive sarcasm, trying to laugh it off or reframe it as a misunderstanding. But the public had already moved past him, and the culture's attention had focused instead on Denzel not as an actor, not even as a celebrity, but as a symbol of quiet resistance, of how power handled provocation without surrendering integrity. And that made him dangerous in the best way, a figure who didn't need to yell, didn't need to go viral, and yet did so because of restraint. And in industry circles, agents, managers, and publicists scrambled to decode the meaning of the moment, wondering if they should coach their clients towards similar discipline or stay in the safe lane of media training. While political commentators on both sides of the spectrum hijacked the clip for their own narratives, twisting its meaning into support or condemnation, but none of it could undo the original context that Denzel, asked to justify his voice, simply reminded the world that he had been listening all along, and that maybe the people asking the loudest questions weren't really interested in answers. And days later, when a reporter caught up with him, leaving a private screening in Los Angeles, asking casually whether he would appear on Piers' show again, Denzel smiled, not mockingly, not sharply, but like someone who had already forgiven the question, and he said, "I don't do reruns," and walked away, leaving the reporter as speechless as the audience had been. And soon after, writers began to compare the moment to classic interviews, placing it in the same breath as Ali versus Buckley, Baldwin versus Cambridge Union, calling it the calmest mic drop in modern media memory. And while Denzel went on to resume his professional commitments express for an upcoming film, a foundation fundraiser, a few private mentorship events for at-risk youth, he avoided the buzz entirely, never once addressing it on his own platforms, never once correcting or confirming the headlines. And that silence only added to the myth of the moment, elevating what could have been another celebrity interview into a cultural checkpoint, a reference point for dignity under fire. And the irony wasn't lost on anyone that the man accused of not listening had, in one sentence, said more than Piers had in a career built on provocation. And as the months passed and the media machine shifted its focus to newer controversies, fresher scandals, louder confrontations, the moment between them refused to fade, kept alive by those who saw in Denzel not just a talented actor, but a man who understood that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't rage, it's precision. And that truth doesn't need applause, it just needs air. And perhaps the most poetic part of it all was that in a world constantly fighting to be heard, the person who listened first was the one who ended up being remembered the loudest.